Here's a guy with some easily answerable questions for atheists.
Atheism, a view that constantly leads you to a dead end while questioning the universe.
Well, if the answer to every question is ultimately God did it, as is the case if theism is true, I don't see how that's any less of a dead end.
While everything we see in the universe is actually evidence for accepting the Creator, atheism ignores them. We can talk about it very long, but today we will consider only 3 questions that atheists cannot answer. Question number 1. Where do these characteristics come from? It's an established rule that one cannot give what one doesn't have to another one.
If that's true, then how can an immaterial God give matter to the universe? How can a non-physical being give physical properties to the universe?
For example, let's say there are only 100 white balls in a glass sphere. What is the chance of a red ball to be chosen from this sphere? Of course it's 0, right? No matter how long you wait, you will not get any, because there is no red ball inside the sphere anyway. Keep this example in mind. Let's consider a black pencil. Can you draw a rainbow with this pencil? No, because the pencil is in no color other than black. So naturally, a rainbow cannot be drawn. What I mean is, you cannot give a feature you don't have to someone else.
I don't think this is even always the case. You can't draw every color with a black pencil, but you can draw shapes that the pencil doesn't have. This seems like a different formulation of the argument that says that lesser things cannot create greater things. If that were the case, humans could not create computers that can add numbers faster than any human can. You wouldn't be able to give yourself a skill that you don't already have.
Now, I take a look at the universe, and I see that everything is made of atoms. However, although atoms are ignorant, willless, lifeless, and blind, deaf and numb creatures having no cognitive senses, when they come together and occur to us as a human being, we see that the man made of them carries all these features. So, the basic question is, how can atoms give these properties to human beings while they lack all of them?
Atoms don't have arms and legs either, but it's not a mystery as to how arms and legs can be made of matter. This argument is a compositional fallacy. It's like saying that since a brick or a piece of concrete isn't 10 feet tall, a 10-foot wall can't be made merely of bricks and concrete. The fact that atoms don't have cognitive senses doesn't mean that they can't make up organisms that do. There's also a category error with respect to thinking of cognitive senses as properties or features when they are activities. They are not something that the matter in our bodies has, they are something that it does. They carry out the activities of cognitive sensation. This also explains what cognitive senses are. Saying that we have them because God has them and gave them to us gives us no clearer picture of what they are or how they work, so theism is much more of a dead end with respect to this question than physicalism is.
As they cannot be the true sources, there must be someone else holding these attributes. Because the atom that cannot see cannot create the seeing eye. The atom that cannot hear cannot make the hearing ear. The atom without life cannot form the human who has life. The human being has a variety of feelings while atoms don't have any. And all of these things are repeatedly happening every day, even every second. So isn't it necessary to accept that they are under the command of a creator who has attributes such as knowledge, will, power, life, sight, hearing, and compassion behind these atoms? As we said, one cannot give what one doesn't have to another one, so there must be a creator.
Human beings have the potential to commit evil. How did we get that? Did God give it to us? If he did, does that mean that he has the potential to commit evil? Theists sometimes say that human beings have a sinful nature. Did we get that from God? If not, then clearly it isn't true that every property has to be bestowed by a being that has that property itself.
Second question, who is the judge, who is the prisoner? If everyone is a soldier, a commander is required. If everyone is a prisoner, a judge is needed.
Well, not if you're holding someone prisoner extrajudicially. The only way it's axiomatically true that the existence of prisoners denotes the existence of a judge is if you stretch the definition of judge to simply mean anyone who holds someone prisoner.
It's a rule that you cannot be the judge and the prisoner at the same time. What does this mean? You know that a room cannot be dark and light at the same time, or a paper cannot be dry or wet at the same time. These are some examples confirming that one cannot hold two opposite attributes at the same time, because carrying two attributes opposite to each other is a contradiction. Being a judge and being a prisoner are two opposite states. If you are one of them, it's impossible to be the other.
I'm not sure that's true. What if you judge yourself worthy of imprisonment and lock yourself in a room and throw the key out of your reach? Why would you not be both the judge and the prisoner?
Now, think of a building which is being built with bricks. If you do not accept the architect to build it, it will be a contradiction to accept that bricks are building this on their own. Because in this case, the bricks will be both prisoners and judges of each other at the same time. Since all the bricks have a nature that is the same with each other and have no knowledge and free will, they cannot form a building by coming together and agreeing. Otherwise, it will be a contradiction. Who will give the order? Who will apply the order? A great confusion would show up. They wouldn't be able to establish a system that could stay protected from collapsing at once.
I think this argument is predicated on the assumption that chaos is the default state of reality and that order can only exist and be maintained by an agent with a conscious will. I don't see how this assumption is warranted. Why can't order be the default state of reality? The laws of physics seem to describe regularities and order that we see in how matter and energy behave, and apologists argue that this is evidence that something is imposing this order. But I don't see why that needs to be the case. This order simply means that things stay the same each time we look at them. That doesn't seem indicative of intelligence or divine intervention at all. Why does something staying the same require intelligence? If things were changing all the time and behaving differently each time we observe them, one could sensibly ask what is causing all these changes. But why does the fact that some things consistently stay the same necessarily need to be explained?
So, they are all prisoners, and there must be an architect who has an absolute power on them. The judge is the architect, and the bricks are his prisoners. Likewise, when we examine the human body, we infer that atoms cannot make this system. 350,000 people are born every day. Who is the commander here, and who is the applier? If we assume the atoms to be doing this job, which ones among them give orders, and which ones follow the orders? How can atoms get along with each other and create so many people every day, while they have no knowledge, free will, and life?
The order inherent to how matter interacts with other matter inevitably results in the order we see in biology. Nobody needs to give the atoms orders to get them to do what they do in a biological system. Biology is simply atoms doing what they naturally do on their own. There's no reason to assume that they would start defying the laws of physics if they weren't being supervised by a god. The laws of physics are not behests, as Bertrand Russell puts it. They aren't orders that matter is obeying. They just describe what matter does all on its own. As I said, it would be weirder if atoms behave differently every time we observe them than if they just continued to behave as they always do. That would be more evidence of a god than the fact that they just behave the same way all the time. It's kind of funny that if theists see something that looks like it breaks the laws of physics, that's a miracle and thus evidence of a god. But they also seem to think that the fact that things are not constantly defying the laws of physics to also be evidence of a god.
So, just as bricks cannot make the building, atoms cannot agree to carry out a quite complex job. That is to say, atoms are prisoners and their judge is God, Allah.
And people say I only respond to Christians. And the reason bricks can't form a building on their own is because they've never been observed to behave in ways that could ever produce a building on their own. We've never seen a brick mortar itself to other bricks. However, there's nothing that we see any atom do inside any biological system that we've never seen an atom do outside of a biological system.
Just as the same with the architect of the building, the architect of the human being continues to create and keep the human body standing all the time.
And our atoms do this by behaving as they always behave on their own. Atoms don't need any special instructions to carry out biological processes. Those processes are just what necessarily happens when atoms end up together in particular biological configurations. And they get into those configurations through chemistry and eventually evolution and natural selection.
Question number 3. What is the real reason? Imagine that we see a train and a baby is pulling this huge train with a rope in his hand. Nobody would believe this, so they would look for a hidden cause behind it, right? Because there are no attributes such as sufficient power, knowledge and will in a baby. No doubt, another resource is required. In fact, we see gaps between causes and effects in the universe every day. While the causes are so simple, the results are extremely complex.
Every complex process is made up of simpler processes. It shouldn't be mysterious to see how complex systems can be made up of simpler patterns of activity.
The emergence of huge trees from a tiny seed. The emergence of a magnificent peacock from a simple egg. The emergence of a complex human from some simple water show us some examples of the gap between causes and results.
There would be a gap between causes and results if we couldn't see how these things get from state A to state B. But we can not only see how they get there, we can also explain why they get there. At no point does it look like God comes along to sprinkle some magic in that causes something to inexplicably turn into something else. Each step of the process follows the same regularities and order.
So it's necessary to look for another source behind the wheel, because atoms lack the required attributes such as knowledge, free will, power, and life. So who holds these attributes? Doesn't science explain this, you might ask?
Yes?
No, science only explains the detailed sequence of the stages of their emergence.
And it also explains why each step in that sequence happens.
For example, they observe that there are some certain stages extending over 28 days inside the egg. Observing the stages doesn't mean that you solve the system and find the answer. Observing is just seeing sequences.
We can do more than just see the sequence, we can also identify what laws of physics cause each step in that sequence to happen.
There are still questions in the mind. How can these atoms form a structure like a peacock despite lacking attributes such as knowledge, free will, power, and life?
They do this by behaving the same way atoms always behave. Again, they're not behaving any differently than they do in any other context. They're just in a particular configuration with each other that translates their regular behavior into these new forms and functions. They don't need to know they're building a peacock to build a peacock any more than tectonic plates need to know how to make a mountain in order to do so. Less complex processes don't need knowledge or intelligence to result in more complex processes. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.